Well, we're at the point now where the words sedition and heat ray are in the news at the same time. Oh, and President Caligula falsely blamed what he called blue states for the coronavirus death toll. For more on this, it's time for a closer look. Been another week in our ongoing John Carpenter hellscape. You know, where The Thing escaped from New York only to move to D.C. to become the Prince of Darkness, and now there's big trouble in little, well, everywhere. Don't believe me? The president lied repeatedly about the timeline for a COVID vaccine and falsely blamed blue states for the coronavirus death toll, while his attorney general suggested charging protesters and political opponents, including the mayor of Seattle, with sedition, and compared coronavirus lockdowns to slavery. The Justice Department looked into filing charges against officials in Portland, and we found out that military police had stockpiled ammunition and a heat ray to use against peaceful protesters in the nation's capital.
The Washington Post reports a military whistleblower says federal officials stockpiled ammunition and sought unusual crowd control devices before clearing protesters across the White House in June. Defense officials asked the D.C. National Guard if it had a heat ray device. The device makes people feel like their skin is on fire.
Just a reminder, we did a closer look yesterday, meaning this is all new. This isn't a monthly catch-up. You used to have to go in a coma for this much to happen. Now you just need to take a nap. Things are so insane, we're skipping past multiple layers of news at once. We don't have time to process the fact that the government has a heat ray because we've already moved on to the fact that they considered using it against peaceful protesters. That's the same weapon the Martians used in War of the Worlds. Nothing is fiction anymore. We should all start studying the schematics of the Death Star now, just in case. And while you're at it, study the schematics for the second Death Star from Jedi, and then Starkiller Base from Force Awakens, which, let's be honest, is just a third Death Star. Look, I know it's 9 movies, but you guys should probably come up with some new weapons. It seems like their weaknesses are the same. I mean, I guess it's bigger, so that's something. And if you don't believe me, here's the president talking about forest fires.
In Europe, they have forest cities. You look at countries, Austria. You look at so many countries. They live in the forest. They're considered forest cities.
Okay, so he's definitely confusing Austria with Endor. I talked to the president of Austria, and he told me something I'll never forget. He said to me, "Yub nub," and you're hearing it more and more. But I mean, honestly, what's next? A headline in the New York Times that says Trump administration considered using powerful moon laser to destroy Seattle. The government has a moon laser? Yeah, man. Try to keep up. I took a nap. Yeah, well, that's where the happens. But as shocking as the news about the heat ray is, the truly disturbing thing here is that our government was stockpiling weapons, including a heat ray. Defense officials were searching for crowd control technology deemed too unpredictable to use in war zones, including the heat ray, which uses millimeter wave technology to essentially heat the skin of people targeted by its invisible ray and makes anyone within their range feel like their skin is on fire. Well, first of all, I felt like my skin is on fire for almost 4 years, so thank you, President Heat Ray. I mean, he does look like a guy who, when his mouth is closed, is working up a fireball to launch. And second, this is so Bond villain. If Trump did have a heat ray, he probably would have explained his plan before he used it. It's a heat ray, James. And once I use it on the crowd, the rest of the plan is simple. I will walk to a church and wave a Bible in the air. But what's your end game, Trump? I don't know. Just to look godly. I don't know, really. I don't think my plan's through. Think about how insane this is. They wanted to use weapons, including a heat ray, against peaceful protesters in America. Also, the president could wave around a Bible in front of a church like someone on a scavenger hunt. And guys, I found it. Now all we need is the signed headshot of Steve Guttenberg, and we're all done. This is what happens when an unhinged political movement talks about peaceful protesters and political opponents like they're enemies of the state. Trump and his allies in right-wing media have been using the language of war to describe people who challenge his authority. As protests broke out over the summer, he called for overwhelming force and said, "You have to dominate the streets." Just this weekend, he used the word insurrection and called for retribution in an interview on Fox News. And he's repeatedly warned that shadowy figures are coming to destroy cities and suburbs, even making up psychotic lies about anarchists flying cross-country in planes.
We had somebody get on a plane from a certain city this weekend, and in the plane, it was almost completely loaded with thugs wearing these dark uniforms, black uniforms with gear and this and that. And there were like 7 people on the plane like this person, and then a lot of people were on the plane to do big damage.
A person was on a plane said that there were about 6 people like that person, more or less. And what happened is the entire plane filled up with the looters, the anarchists, the rioters, people that obviously were looking for trouble. This was a first-hand account of a plane going from Washington to wherever.
I'm sorry, so your story is a bunch of people were mad at the government and wanted to riot and loot, so they went on kayak.com the night before, booked a flight away from the nation's capital, somehow got 6 seats together, then went to an airport full of security cameras, showed their IDs to several people, and quietly watched, trolls on their seatbacks until they got to wherever? That was a first-hand account that they were flying to wherever? You might want to get a second-hand in there to help with the details. Trump would make such a terrible witness for a police sketch artist. Well, they had a head, and beneath the head there was sort of a skin-covered tube that connected the head to the shoulder area, a neck. Oh, so you know the guy. Also, shadowy groups, as a rule, don't give their operators uniforms and sit them together on the plane in one big group. You're thinking of Ashley's bachelorette party. We think we know who the leader is she was wearing a tiara. Besides, we all know the only anarchists on flights are the people who crash the gate before their boarding group is called. Those people are the real threat to law and order. Hey, better get up here in case this is one of those planes where 37D is up in the front. Now, that happened a few weeks ago, but the important thing here is Trump was not alone in spreading this insane rumor. It appears to have originated with a viral Facebook post from a few months ago. GOP Congressman Devin Nunes claimed he personally witnessed the group of protesters on a flight. You remember old Nunes over here, right? The guy who always looks like he didn't write anything down during Final Jeopardy and then sues Alex Trebek about it. Then the head of Customs and Border Protection went on Fox News and repeated the lie, even though the agency had to later admit that there was no information to support his claim. In fact, last week, a whistleblower accused the Department of Homeland Security of distorting intelligence to support Trump's lies about Antifa. And then last night, we learned in yet another bombshell story that Trump's deranged Attorney General Bill Barr suggested charging violent protesters with sedition and accused them of trying to overthrow the government.
Tonight, there are reports the Attorney General has told federal prosecutors to consider charging violent protesters with conspiring to overthrow our government. Wall Street Journal was first to report that Bill Barr, quote, encouraged the prosecutors to seek a number of federal charges, including under a rarely used sedition law.
Man, things are bad, but I never thought I'd hear the words sedition and heat ray in the same news cycle. Our politics is now half Founding Fathers, half Power Rangers. Bill Barr, he's just Trump with a law degree. All you have to do is imagine him with Trump hair and circles around his eyes standing next to some weirdo B-list scam artist like the Demon Sperm Doctor or the My Pillow guy. This is all the culmination of an increasingly unhinged and aberrant right-wing movement that sees its political opponents as illegitimate and seeks to punish them. That's why Trump, very obviously, does not care what happens to people living in so-called blue states. During the coronavirus pandemic, he basically said as much yesterday.
If you look at what we've done and all of the lives that we've saved, and I'm going to ask that a graph be put up, and now it's up. This was right at the beginning. This was our prediction that if we do a really good job, we'll be at about 100,000 to 240,000 deaths, and we're below that substantially, and we'll see where it comes out. But that would be if we did the good job, and that's despite the fact that the blue states had tremendous death rates. If you take the blue states out, we're at a level that I don't think anybody in the world would be at. We're really at a very low level.
Well, okay, so by that logic, the more blue states we have, the better the job you did on this virus. I think we're about to see Fox anchors telling viewers to help the president by voting for Biden. Good news for President Trump is Florida has been called for Joe Biden, thus putting the blood on his hands. Also, as someone who lives in one of those states and knows people affected by this virus, I would just like to say, go yourself, you rotting, soulless business ham. But sure, if you just take out all the people that died, then you did a great job, dude. By the same token, if you take out all his albums, Kid Rock has had a fantastic career. This has to be one of the most grotesque things a president has ever said. I'm sure Trump's not our first sociopath president, but he's definitely the first one who's open about it. He's the kid who lights ants on fire for fun, and when you catch him doing it, he says, "It's not what you think. Torturing living things gives me joy." But it's also the most honest articulation of Trump's beliefs. If you can't empower or enrich him personally, he doesn't care about you. It's the same ideology that treats protesters as traitors and calls for political opponents to be charged with sedition. And by the way, the only way they can get away with this stuff is because we have an ass-backwards electoral college system that lets Republican vampires write off anyone who doesn't live in one of like a dozen swing states. If we had a national popular vote, Trump and the GOP would have to campaign in places like Portland or New York City, and I personally would love to see him try to pander to Portlanders by growing a mustache and riding a penny farthing to an artisanal pickle store. And this is a lot for a pickle. You guys, there's a pretty expensive pickle. And this isn't the first time. It's a good pickle. I'm just saying, it's a lot. It's a lot for a pickle. This isn't the first time Trump has made clear he doesn't care about Americans who live in states he didn't win. Remember, he also wanted to cut federal aid to California during the wildfires last year. And a former Homeland Security official said Trump demanded FEMA pull funding because California didn't support him. Just a few weeks ago, he ordered federal agencies to cut funding to what he called anarchist jurisdictions like New York, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. Trump only cares about the health and safety of Americans when it can help him politically, which is why, for example, he's repeatedly claimed a COVID vaccine is right around the corner, even though experts say that's not true.
We remain on track to deliver a vaccine before the end of the year and maybe even before November 1st. We think we can probably have it sometime during the month of October.
This could have taken 2 or 3 years, and instead it's going to be done in a very short period of time. Could even have it during the month of October.
We're going to have a vaccine in a matter of weeks. It could be 4 weeks. It could be 8 weeks.
Could be 4 weeks, could be 8 weeks. He talks about a life-saving vaccine the way he probably talked to the electrician who wanted to get paid for wiring Trump Tower. Mr. Trump, we sent you the invoice months ago, and I'm going to pay you, Tony. Could be 4 weeks, could be 8 weeks. Also, experts have repeatedly said it's highly unlikely a vaccine could be available by October. I think Trump might be confusing a coronavirus vaccine with DQ's pumpkin pie blizzard. We're very close to having a vaccine. The scientists are telling me it will have real pumpkin in it. And of course, it will be topped with whipped cream, which Dr. Fauci, I believe you were saying, would provide an extra layer of protection against the virus. He's covering his face. That is scientists for yes. So yesterday, the CDC director, Dr. Robert Redfield, went before Congress and made clear that even if a vaccine is available for healthcare workers and at-risk groups by the end of the year, it won't be broadly available to the public at large until summer or fall of 2021.
I think there will be vaccine that initially be available sometime between November and December, but very limited supply and will have to be prioritized. If you're asking me when is it going to be generally available to the American public so we can begin to take advantage of vaccine to get back to our regular life, I think we're probably looking at late second quarter, third quarter, 2021.
Oh man, now I gotta rescind all those invitations I sent out for a December celebratory post-COVID orgy. Still, it's probably better to do it in the second or third quarter next year, tax reasons. Anyway, the point is experts agree a safe, effective vaccine will very likely arrive, but we have to be realistic about the fact that things aren't just gonna instantly revert to normal before then or even after there's a vaccine. We still need to practice public health measures like hand washing, social distancing, avoiding large crowds, and especially mask wearing. We know universal mask wearing can be extremely effective, as Redfield made clear in his testimony, which is why it sucks that we have a president who says stuff like this.
A lot of people don't want to wear masks. There are a lot of people think the masks are not good. And there are a lot of people that, as an example,
Who are those people?
Well, I'll tell you who those people are. Waiters, they come over and they serve you, and they have a mask. And I saw it the other day where they were serving me. And they're playing with a mask. I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying what happens. They're playing with a mask, so the mask is over, and they're touching it, and then they're touching the plate. That can't be good. The concept of a mask is good, but it also does, you're constantly touching it, you're touching your face, you're touching plates. There are people that don't think masks are good.
All right, first of all, the only people who don't think masks are good are assholes who think they're standing up for freedom by giving a teenager a hard time at Costco. Don't tread on me, Madison. Second, you think waiters don't want to wear masks? I'm pretty sure they'd wear masks even without a pandemic. Then you wouldn't see all their facial expressions when people ask for substitutions. Can I get the Greek salad, feta on the side, add quinoa, a tiny amount of balsamic vinaigrette, replace the cucumbers with carrots, and then switch them back to cucumbers and add the grilled chicken? But instead of grilled, can it be baked? And instead of chicken, can it be tofu? But can you shape it into a chicken? Thank you, Madison. What the president said about discounting deaths in so-called blue states was not just another Trump gaffe. It was an honest articulation of his beliefs and the beliefs of the movement he leads. The same goes for Barr, comparing lockdowns to slavery and wanting to charge people with sedition. It's an unhinged political movement that sees anyone who doesn't support them as illegitimate and wants to dismantle democracy. And if that happens, we'll all have to move to Europe to escape the Trump heat ray and live with the Ewoks in one of those
Forest cities.
Yub-nub. Yub-nub. This has been a closer look. God's Love We Deliver cooks and brings over 2 million meals a year to men, women, and children living with HIV, AIDS, cancer, and other serious illnesses, and they need your help now more than ever. If you're watching this online, you can hit the donate button. Stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask. We love you.